And now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters. Douglas Fisher, PhD, is Professor and Chair of Educational Leadership at San Diego State University and a leader at Health Sciences High and Middle College. Previously, Doug was an early intervention teacher and elementary school educator. He is the recipient of an International Reading Association William S. Gray Citation of Merit and an Exemplary Leader Award from the Conference on English Leadership of NCTE. And in 2022, he was inducted into the Reading Hall of Fame. He has published numerous articles on teaching and learning, as well as books such as the Teacher Clarity Playbook, PLC Plus, Visible Learning for Literacy, Comprehension, The Skill, Will, and Thrill of Reading, and Teaching Students to Drive Their Learning. Doug loves being an educator and hopes to share that passion with others. Next, I have Nancy Frey. Nancy Frey, PhD, is a professor in educational leadership at San Diego State and a teacher leader at Health Sciences High and Middle College. She's a member of the International Literacy Association's Literacy Research Panel. Her published titles include Visible Learning and Literacy, This is Balanced Literacy, Removing Labels, PLC Plus, a playbook for instructional leaders, How Scaffolding Works, and Onboarding Teachers. Nancy is a credentialed special educator, reading specialist, and administrator in California, and learns from teachers and students every day. Next, we have Oscar Corrigan. Oscar Corrigan is an assistant principal and director of the English Language Learner Program at Health Sciences High and Middle College in San Diego, California. He has 15 years of experience in education, teaching middle school social studies and secondary history, lecturing at San Diego State University, supervising teacher candidates, and implementing restorative practices. Oscar earned his doctorate in educational leadership from San Diego State University. With his classroom experience and research, Oscar strives to implement instructional practices that best promote an equitable learning environment for students from diverse backgrounds. Oscar is also the author of the brand new book, Becoming a Social Justice Educator. Thank you to all three of you for being here today, and now I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Megan, and welcome to everybody. So excited to be here with all of you this afternoon and get to share a little bit about our passion about working with multilingual learners. For me, if I can share a little bit about myself, I was born in Colombia. I migrated to the United States at the age of 11. And so I wanted to make a difference for the students that reminded me of me, that share a lot of the experiences that I went through with myself. As a classroom teacher, I experienced that many of the experiences of multilingual learners had not changed from when I was in school. And so we really sought out to see how visible learning could make the greatest impact on multilingual learners and what influences could be used to ensure that our students were receiving an equitable learning environment.
And I'll just add a note. Oscar did his dissertation work on this very topic. What does the Visible Learning Database teach us about effective learning environments for multilingual learners? So this, Oscar, is almost like you get to do your dissertation defense all over again.
And exactly, and what Oscar discovered, and certainly working with John Hattie, as well as Doug and myself, is around an instructional framework that works well for multilingual learners. That's the lens that we're putting on this, but quite frankly, works well for all learners. And so the way we've organized it is based on Oscar's findings around what he came to call a 5C network. And that includes that you've got to pay attention to the climate for learning that happens. Certainly the Visible Learning Database is rich in being able to talk about what the climate is. As well as you've got to balance what it is that challenge looks like. Challenge is always important in learning. How do you ensure that there is the proper level of rigor and challenge for multilingual learners? That matters. Another element of this probably comes as no surprise to so many of you, certainly not to us, is that clarity of learning is crucial for students to be able to excel. And that cohesion in learning is also critical. We have to pay attention to how it is that learning experiences are organized. And finally, that our assessment practices inform the instruction that we make, that assessment is informative, and that we're able to respond to what is sticking and what isn't sticking for students.
And again, 5C, to help us think about it, and I appreciate the way Oscar organized this, all of this evidence from visible learning, but applied to multilingual learners. So we're learning about the systems and practices that amplify the learning of multilingual learners. And I hope by the end of our session, you can explain what and why of each element in this 5C instructional framework. How do we ensure all 5 of these are in place for our students as they learn language and content simultaneously?
And so, of course, we sought to look at the influences and see how visible learning could apply to multilingual learners. We wanted to make sure that everything that we do was intentional and that it met the needs of our students, because their needs are unique. And we know that we must address this situation, these students, because our schools, the face of our schools are changing. And we know that our multilingual learners make up a little bit over 10% of our student population. To put that into perspective, that is a little bit over 5.1 million students. We need to make sure that we are addressing the unique needs of multilingual learners, because unfortunately, the data shows that only 62% of multilingual learners are graduating. Something is wrong. We are not meeting their needs. And so as educators, we need to recognize that our multilingual learners are diverse. And so their needs are completely different and unique to each and every single student. Secondly, they're doubly challenged. What we mean by that is not only must our multilingual learners learn English, they have to learn new content in the English language. So it's a double challenge, and it's difficult to do. I can tell you based on my own experiences, it just creates havoc in your brain. You're thinking about the situation, you're thinking about the content, and sometimes the language falls behind. We also need to understand that assessments for multilingual learners need to be multidimensional. The old way of testing students, the one test gives us the answers, just does not tell us the whole story about our students or where our multilingual learners are in the process. And of course, if our multilingual learners are not meeting the same progress that other students and their peers are, we need to ensure that they have access to interventions, that they have the help that they need to be able to catch up and to be able to access that curriculum. As we mentioned, multilingual learners are each unique. And when we talk about some of the uniqueness, for example, the language, although many of our students may speak the same language, in my case, I spoke Spanish, but when I moved to the United States, I struggled with English and Spanish because my dialect coming from Colombia was not the same as my peers who lived down in Mexico. And so oftentimes, not only was I having difficulty having conversations in the classroom in English, I also struggled having conversations in the language that I knew I was really strong in and the one that I had grown up with. And so that created a new challenge. We also must understand that the proficiency in the home language could change. And so we have to be aware of where it is that our students are so that we can meet their needs. Our students speak different languages. Some of our students, they're struggling to speak their home language. Of course, they're going to struggle to acquire a new language. But on the other hand, we have students who speak 3, 4 languages, and they're really advanced. And so when they're in school, we must push them and push that high standard, that high expectation so that we can continue to push our students to be successful. We must be aware that our students all come from different backgrounds and they all have different personalities. Some are really outgoing and want to participate and want to put themselves out there. Some of them are really shy and don't want to take that step, but that does not mean that they don't understand the content that they are learning. Of course, when we talk about language, it is at the center of everything that we teach. Reading, writing, speaking, and listening. It must happen every single day, and we must do it intentionally. We must understand that our students, they bring a lot of their experiences into the classroom. This great quote that says half the curriculum walks in through the classroom door is because we need to honor the experiences of our students and the knowledge that they bring with them every single day. We need to understand that our multilingual learners have passions, have content knowledge that they can add to their classroom discussions. When we think about acquiring a second language, there are some things that we need to ensure that our students are exposed to. And so one of them is that comprehensible input. We need to make sure that they are listening to the language each and every day. They have opportunities to hear the language in an academic setting. We also must allow our students to have that comprehensible output, the way they share the language. It must be intentional. They must have that interaction with the students every single day. We want our students to collaborate so that they have the opportunities to practice using the language each and every day in school. And of course, as we will see in a little bit, we need to create a low anxiety environment. The climate of the classroom makes a huge difference in whether our multilingual learners take a chance or not. It is important that we have the correct systems of support. We need to ensure that our multilingual learners had an equitable opportunity to access the curriculum. All the scaffolds, the way the lessons are given, they need to ensure that our students understand the material and can produce the content that we want them to produce. We want to make sure that everybody collaborates and everybody's on the same team, from the teacher to the speech therapist, to the specialist, to the intervention team, and to the families. We must do this as a team and together. We need to integrate every single thing that we do with language and a purpose. We need to ensure that our multilingual learners understand what is expected of them.
So in the model that Oscar built, based on the visible learning research, starts off with climate. What is the climate we're trying to create for students to learn? So I'll show you a video. This is a school where Oscar is vice principal. This is about belonging. Part of the climate is, do I feel that I belong here? So watch and feel free to live chat as you listen to students' perspective of belonging.
When I don't feel it, like belonging, it's like a fear that goes in, like I feel it deep down.
I just feel uncomfortable and isolated from everybody else,
Lonely.
Yeah. It makes me feel like I want to close myself up. Like I'd stop talking. I'll probably go sit in the back and try to take up less space as much as I can.
One of the things that I found hard to make me feel like I belong is my race, just because I'm mixed. So I've heard people talk about me like out in public, like kids saying, oh, he's probably adopted or something.
My mom was like, yo, you can't let them know that you're Muslim or Arab because of the negative stigma that the Western world portrays around Middle Eastern and Islam. And don't let them know, like, if they ask you're American, you don't speak Arabic, you only know English.
You know, every culture person has specific food and like the smell. And like other kids would just make unnecessary comments talking about, oh, why does it smell like that? When it actually tastes really good.
Yeah, it's like another thing with the ignorance, It made me want to hide that part of myself.
I was at my convention center for my competition, and just walking up from the hotel room, I encountered some guys from a different school, probably different state, and like it was just remarks about like my sexual orientation. I knew that like being gay and like a minority, I was already like on the outskirts.
The teachers, they were supposed to help, but it was more like they just didn't pay attention. It was more like they didn't care. It was more like, oh, they're just kids. That's how I feel like they would think. Yeah.
It's hard feeling like you don't belong.
Thank you for the comments. Yeah, sad. And something we can do about it, and something that we're working on continually. We've been looking at belonging as part of the climate of the school and the classroom. and yeah, I saw the comment. It's our responsibility to feel they belong because they do belong. Thank you for that. And those needs and the historical. So we started looking at research on belonging. And we adapted and adopted Eric Carter's model that says there are at least 11 dimensions of belonging. And you need to experience all of these to feel that you belong. Are you welcome? Are you invited? Are you present? Known? What strengths do you have? Are you accepted for who you are and your identities? Are you involved? But look at some of the other side. Are you befriended? Are you needed? Yes, we'll get you the link to the video. It will play in this as well, and then we have it on our YouTube. Are you needed? This is the one that we talked about a lot. If you are in a learning situation and you're receiving a lot of help, when do you get to also give help? Because belonging is a feeling that you're part of a group where your contributions are needed. Eric Carter is the person who put this together, and he did it originally on students with intellectual disabilities. And we've adapted it to say more broadly, specifically with multilingual learners, we have a responsibility to create a sense of belonging, membership. You belong here, and I'm thrilled that you are here. Also, in the culture of a classroom, in the culture for learning, is this classroom cohesion. And classroom cohesion has another strong effect on students' learning when they have a sense that there's a cohesion. Now, belonging can be part of classroom cohesion. So is helping peers when each other helps. The environment, the physical environment you create creates that cohesion as well. Is it a welcoming environment where things in this environment help me learn? The class agreements. What do we agree? How do we agree to treat each other? How do we agree to be with one another? And then grouping. In some places, multilingual learners are grouped in a homogeneous group, and we know the evidence is they don't learn as well. We actually know a lot about creating this cohesion in the classroom. The question about belonging, how do we create a sense of belonging? How do we build that belonging on those 11 dimensions? Here's an example of helping. How do we think about buddying students? Because we often think about, like peer support, or we think about language brokers. How do we think about pairing students with a buddy and changing these partners to encourage relationships? And how do we think about the internal cohesion of a class where all of us are responsible for teaching and learning one another? Here's a quick check of the learning environment, a learning environment survey. I'll let you take a look at these questions that you might use to consider the climate and culture in that school building. Nancy?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were introducing this.
Oh,
So challenge around learning is also equally essential. The climate helps certainly to establish some of those very foundational needs that all of us need to feel that we are needed, that we have opportunities to be able to build social relationships with others. But that climate, while it sets the stage, is not sufficient all on its own. There also has to be this emphasis on the right level of challenge. I love the language that John Hattie uses: not too hard, not too boring.
Yep.
Finding that sweet spot along the way. And to be sure, multilingual learners do absolutely need to be able to acquire skills. And some of those skills include not only the academic skills that they're learning, but as Oscar had noted earlier, they're doubly challenged because they're also acquiring the skills around language simultaneously. And so skills absolutely are important, but again, not enough if we're only paying attention to those skills. They also need challenge. All learners need challenge. We need to be able to have that stretch that challenges learners, because in that space, in that stretch space, that's where learning occurs. Remember, there's a difference between stretching them and shoving them. We definitely don't want to do that. We don't want to reach that frustration level, but we do want to have that stretch that's involved with them. And challenge should not be just more boring tasks, lots of busy work, lots of repetition. Challenge is not the same as just more tasks, a larger number of math problems, for example. So we'd like to talk through some ideas around thinking about challenge and what challenge actually looks like.
And we've been working on this for a while and thinking through, how do we design tasks that range in difficulty and complexity? And these are important things to consider. When we design tasks for students, sometimes we give them low difficulty, low complexity tasks. Sometimes we raise the difficulty, but not the complexity. Sometimes we raise the complexity, but not the difficulty. And sometimes we push them into struggle. Now, when I think of difficulty, it's how much work, effort, or time is required. Whereas complexity is the kind of thinking that we're looking for from students. We're not looking for, as Nancy said, just more work. We're not looking for boring work. We're certainly not looking for shut-up sheets to have students fill out for hours. We are looking for a balance of tasks. Now, I'll highlight a couple. So in this lower quadrant, where the tasks are less difficult, easier, and less complex, those tasks build fluency, or in the research world, automaticity. They build this automatic behavior with students. Now, I want to point out that sight words are part of the work that we have to do. Now, most people think of sight words as a primary grade phenomenon, that only the students in primary grades need to work on sight words. Now, we've been arguing for the last couple of years, adolescents still need sight word development, but it's probably not the high frequency words. Although if you're a newcomer, you are learning high frequency words, but it's different as you think about it. And are those secondary teachers able to choose academic language words and help students pronounce them, say them, write them, spell them, use them on a regular basis? So I thought we'd show you our ethnic studies teacher and doing some sight word practice. So there are 5 to 8 words a week. I'll show you one word. They cycle through them all week long to build it. So he's going to talk about, I'm going to use these words eventually in a close reading. Sight words are words that you instantly recognize at sight. Nancy, I'm sure, is going to type that in the chat. Thank you, Nancy. Yeah. Let's watch Yves and work in the ethnic studies 9th grade class.
Okay, so let's go ahead and begin. Let's do a sight activity that we're prepared with some vocabulary for our close read that we'll do. Our unit, we started it yesterday, 6.1, was systems of power and change. We're moving on to address one system of power, okay, which is Jim Crow laws, and we'll address certain things within that. So I'm going to go ahead and pick out certain vocabulary words that we have for you all. We're going to go ahead and practice spelling them, practice defining them, okay? And then if we have some trouble with the spelling, we'll go around and see what some common misconceptions are with those spellings. Why are we spelling it the way we're spelling it? Why that vocabulary term might mean what it means, okay? So some of these words, might be difficult, some might be easy for you, but either way, there's always kind of that little trick in that word that might make it difficult for you all to spell and to understand. Once we do this practice and you understand what that word means and how to spell it, when you see it on your close read, it'll be that much easier for you to know what that word's mean in the context of the text. Okay, so our first word is going to be apartheid. Okay? Now, before we start spelling, I want you guys to know if you know what the word means. I picked this one on purpose. It should be a stumper. Is a policy of discrimination against the grounds of race. Okay, so I want you guys to try to spell it on your own first. Okay, once you're ready, you can hold your boards up. Okay, good. This is a hard one, huh? What do you got, Mildred? Do you got something yet? Okay, I'm seeing some really good ones. I'm seeing some close ones. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'll spell out the word for you.
Oh, so close.
So a lot of you,
Oh, so close.
a lot of you are really close. Okay, a lot of you had the EI switch, but we have apartheid. Okay,
I was one of them.
I know a lot of you are really close. You're gonna chunk in 3 parts, and let's see. I think a par is probably one good chunk, right? Maybe parthai. Another one, maybe. I think that's probably a good start. So we're gonna go ahead and do the first chunk. APAR. Okay, we're chunking that to spell it on our shoulder. Okay, the second part is going to be THE. Okay, we can think of the, and the last part ID. Okay, so let's think of APAR, APAR, the THE, and then ID, the last part. Okay, so I want you guys to practice with me. Go ahead and give me that tap. Okay, we're going to go up, apartheid, APAR. So APAR. Okay, the second part is going to be THE, and the last part, ID, THE, I. Apartheid. All right, so I'm going to erase the word. You guys erase the word from your boards. Oops. So everybody should have the word erase. Go ahead and erase it, erase it, erase it, erase it. And then let's see how we do. Go ahead and try to spell it again. Remember about your chunking. Good, good, perfect, good.
And yes, the movement. So we'll see a lot of arm tapping at our school, but there are other ways to deal with sight words. Yeah, Karen, good points. There's going to be multiple lessons that go through the week as they take it apart and get into automatically recognizing words by sight.
Sorry, I was busy typing away. Another dimension of when we think about challenge in particular is that there are some things that students must learn that build stamina. In other words, these are tasks that are more difficult to be able to do. In other words, they require more effort, but they're in that range of relatively low complexity. And so I'll show you an example of what that might look like. Power writing, which is specifically to build stamina. And power writing is a strategy, a timed writing strategy. When Doug and I do it with our high school class, we typically do 3 one-minute rounds for students to be able to write, and we tell them write as much as you can, as well as you can. We will often give them a word or a couple of words for inspiration. And what they're doing is they are gauging, they are keeping track of how their own proficiency around writing is developing. This is from one of our 9th grade classes at Hoover High School. And we simply have students count the number of words that they have written, again, timed writing words, to build stamina so that over time, they're able to increase the number of words per minute that they're able to generate. And by the way, doing these kinds of graphs, they're able to chart their own progress. progress. So we've talked about two dimensions of challenge so far. There are some things that we do that are around building fluency. There are some things that we do that are around building stamina. And a third dimension of that, and notice that we're going above the line now, is strategic thinking. These are practices that are relatively low in difficulty. In other words, there's a level of familiarity, but now there's a higher degree of complexity to go along with it. So I'll give you an example of this. This was a study that was done a couple of years ago with a large number of English students who were also multilingual students. And the question the researchers had was, what works better, more complex text or less complex text? And the other question they had is, what works better, using a KWL process? What do we know? What do we want to know? What do we learn? Or should we use a listen, read, discuss process? In other words, the teacher doing the presentation, then we read and we have a short discussion afterwards. Well, guess what they found out? What they found out was that when you paired up more complex text with KWL, in other words, taking the time, what do we already know about this topic before we engage in the reading? What do we want to know about this topic? Then engaging in the reading and returning back. What have we learned about this topic? Proved to be a real gain for these students. The strategy itself, KWL, less difficult. Most students are pretty familiar with being able to do that, but with more complex text. And then a fourth dimension around challenge is, how is it that we support students to engage in struggle? We know that struggle is a key element in learning. They shouldn't be struggling all day long, but they do regularly need to be able to have those periods of struggle. This is when tasks are highly difficult as well as highly complex. And the thing to keep in mind here is that this is where the teacher is doing a lot of scaffolding. One of the challenges is that there are lots of students who find grade level complex sentences to really be impenetrable. What that doesn't mean is that they're unable or unready to comprehend those complex texts. So instead, what we have to ensure is that students are going to be successful working with that complex text because they're given guidance on how to use the elements within sentences to make meaning. Now, I'll demonstrate for you another approach to this. How do you make that complex text well understood? And this comes from Lily Wong Fillmore, talking again about supporting multilingual learners. Juicy sentences. It's taking a complex reading, selecting a couple of sentences, and with scaffolding from the teacher, helping students to deconstruct and then reconstruct the sentences so that they get time to be able to see how the language features contribute to the meaning. So there's a protocol that is widely utilized. This is from Great City Schools. And the Juicy Sentence Protocol essentially goes like this. Here's this short reading, a couple of sentences. What is this about? What does it say about the who or the what? What does this part say? What questions does it answer? In other words, we're deconstructing the sentence. We're pulling that sentence apart in order to do so. Let me show you an example of that. So, and Oscar, you're welcome. This is sixth grade social studies text that we're working with here. And here are two incredibly dense, complex sentences straight out of the kind of reading that students do. Working with the vizier were scribes who kept government records. These high-level employees had mastered a rare skill in ancient Egypt. They could read and write. That's actually pretty complex for any student, but especially if you are newer to the language. So we take that apart in order for students to understand, what is this about? Who is it about? How is it that we're going to know what it is that they are saying about the Vizier, that they are able to read and write? In this particular case, it was amphora. For those of you that are English teachers, that was involved with that. And so this gives students a chance to be able to understand that there's a referent that's in there to a previously stated idea, and now the author's using different words or phrases. So Doug, let's go ahead and put those two sentences back up again. They talk about the scribes. There's your first referent and what it is that they do. In the next sentence, they're no longer using the word scribe. They're saying they're high-level employees who are able to do so. For students who are still learning the language, they may not be able to make that connection. With juicy sentences, we take those apart, we deconstruct them, we put them back together. Spending 5 or 10 minutes on a couple of key sentences like this warms up the complex reading that is to follow. And so we can ask questions like, who is this passage about? What noun phrase describes them? What signal word connects the noun to the noun phrase? What is the main idea that the author is telling us? Put all of these together. This is a great way to be able to think about how it is that we ensure that there's the proper level of rigor that goes on. Remember, rigor doesn't mean everything is hard. They need opportunities to build their fluency with skills. They need opportunities to strengthen their stamina, as well as to apply familiar strategic thinking to more complex ideas, and at times to confront struggle, but always in the presence of the teacher with lots of scaffolding.
And of course, teacher clarity. As teachers, we want to make sure that we add clarity to everything that we do, especially for our multilingual learners. We want to make sure that we have clarity in the way that we organize tasks, assignments. We want to make sure that we have clarity in the way that we explain what is expected for our students. We want to make sure that we have clarity when we use examples and practices in our assessments, because we know that clarity is the antidote of anxiety. If you think of us as humans, anytime that we have any unknown, any situations when we're not sure what is expected of us, we have that fear, the nervousness. We're unsure what it is that we need to do. And so what we want to do is eliminate that feeling from our students, because we know if we eliminate the anxiety from our students, that fear of the unknown, our students will be likely to plan. You can go next slide, Doug. Sorry.
I'm trying to that's sorry. With clarity, we know that our students are more likely to plan goals and predict what will happen next. They will know how to accurately judge their own progress. That's what we want. We want our students to understand where it is that they find themselves in the learning travel. We want to make sure that they feel safe and that they feel like they can be successful. The visible learning evidence suggests that teacher clarity has a great impact on student learning. It has a 0.85 effect size. And so we want to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to add clarity and expectations, learning intentions for our multilingual learners to be successful. Sorry.
No, it's okay. One more. And so how do we judge? How do we ask our students? How do we make sure that they know what it is that they are learning? And so what we do is we ask students 3 questions. What am I learning today? That is the learning intentions. Do they understand what is expected of them? Why am I learning it? Do students understand the relevance between the content that they are learning and themselves? Does it impact their learning? Do they understand the connections that they might have with them, with the content and their own experiences? How will I know what I have learned? That is the success criteria. How, as a student, can I self-assess whether or not I am learning the material and the content that the teacher wants me to learn? And so we have this great graphic that kind of shows you what we're talking about. And so we think of the learning intention as the destination, the place where we want our multilingual learners to get to. And so as teachers, we create success criteria. We call these markers, kind of check-in points where we can check and see where we are in the learning progress along the way. And so if you see the next slide, you can see that what we want to create for our students is that check-in point. Where am I along the way, and am I making progress? As a teacher, then you can analyze where your students are at, and you can determine, is it safe to move forward, or do I need to take a step back and reteach some of the content that I've already taught because my students are not ready to move on? And of course, because we are talking about multilingual learners, when we talk about learning intentions, when we talk about the purpose of our content, we want to make sure that we are tying the language with the literacy. What is the language learning intention? What are the demands of the language? And how are we going to incorporate that each and every way so that our students not only write it, but speak it with each other and collaborate? And so we want to make sure that to create a safe learning environment for our students, we're eliminating the fear of the unknown. We're very clear, we're intentional, and each and every day we provide our students with learning intentions. Here's an example of learning intentions that we found in the past. It has a specific goal for content, language, and social. So how the students will behave in their classroom. So we want to make sure that we are taking apart our daily plans and really adding intentionality to every little aspect of the lesson.
Thank you, Oscar. And I was putting in the chat, we have so many videos on teacher clarity on our Fisher and Frey YouTube channel. I was just thinking about all the teachers who let us come in and film them, setting the intention, leading through the lesson, etc., including several people who are on the chat today. You'll see videos on there. Now, there's been a lot of chat around cohesion, about how we build cohesion in the lessons, and that's around quality core instruction. I don't want to minimize the role that intervention plays for students who need it, but quality core instruction is super important. And we think a lot around gradual release. Nancy and I have been working on gradual release since 1997. It's been around a really long time. We drew these triangles in 1997, trying to think about visually displaying the balance in a lesson between teacher responsibility and student responsibility. The problem with this graphic is that some people think you have to start at the top and go down. We've never said that. We've never written that. You can start anywhere you want and work your way around. In reality, it's going through there all the time. You're probably doing multiple, even in a 43-minute class, you're going, they have talk for 5 minutes, then you're back to you, then they're back to them, then they do something independent, on and on. As you can see, our interpretation of gradual release of responsibility theory has 4 components. Often we see 3 components. We see the collaborative learning left out. You don't get good at something you don't do. We don't learn academic language from listening to academic language. We learn academic language when we produce academic language. So when we're looking at dual language schools, if we're learning Spanish or Mandarin or sign language or German or whatever language is the target, you have to actually use the language. If you're learning English right now in this part of the day, you have to produce English. We want to see more production time. So we say that it is non-negotiable in a gradual release lesson to have a collaborative phase because we want to hear students learn and practice academic language. There are other things we do. Teachers also model and demonstrate. That's what we call focused instruction. They model, they demonstrate. They could do a quick lecture. They could do a video, whatever. Then we guide students through language development. We call it guided instruction. Madeline Hunter and others called it guided practice. We believe teachers have an instructional role as they guide students. So we don't call it guided practice for that reason. And then we want students to independently promote their metacognition, their goal setting, their self-regulation, etc. Now, a lot of this, if you take on examples, things like comparative linguistics, that's a big important part of what we do now with multilingual learners. Comparative linguistics occurs through gradual release of responsibility. Intentional language development occurs through gradual release of responsibility. We're practicing language, we're scaffolding language, we're using language. Teachers are monitoring that and providing practice opportunities for students. The last area that we think about, and we're not spending a lot of time tonight on these last two, is around checking into the learning. That our assessments should inform instruction. Now that idea has been around for a really long time. Way back in the 40s, people were saying the goal of the teacher is to figure out what you want students to learn and what evidence you will accept that they've learned it. And we still struggle with that as a profession. What is it we want students to learn? What evidence will we accept that they've actually learned it? And we think about how we scaffold assessments. What does the assessment with or without scaffolding look like? And like all the other aspects of learning as a multilingual learner, we should be thinking about the assessments we provide, not just the instruction, not just the tasks. We need to be thinking about how do we scaffold the way in which we assess it. So you can see in this example that there's an assessment example, there's with scaffolding and without scaffolding. And we can restructure it visually. We can reduce the number of words when it's wise. Sometimes more words help students. Present information in students with their content language while the language demands are reduced. There are lots of ways to restructure our assessments to get accurate information from students about what they know and can do, because we should be focusing on strengths. We should be strength spotters, not deficit detectors. We should spend our energy on what students can already do, because the cognitive science world says we go from the known to the new, not the other way around. We have to think about noticing strengths and then building experiences for our students. So to conclude, to wrap up our time together, Oscar, I want a note of appreciation for you about taking this big database of visible learning and saying, what can I do to improve the learning experiences of multilingual learners? And we talked about the climate of a culture. If you don't feel like you belong, if there's not strong class cohesion, if you're being bullied in class, if you don't think the environment's there to help you learn, it's going to compromise your learning. If you only get below grade level practice because the assumption is you're not smart or you don't know enough to be learning, you're not going to learn. A lot of our students have so much to say, but they don't know how to say it in the language that's the majority right now. And we need to be thinking about that. How do we challenge them in ways that allow that gift to come through? Oscar talked a lot about clarity. We have to know what we want our students to learn. And that learning is both academic, linguistic, and social. All aspects are important as we think about what we want learning to occur. We talked a little bit about cohesion. Having clarity doesn't just mean a learning attention and success criteria, although those are important. It also means lining up organized experiences that allow students to have comprehensible input that they can use to learn. And then lastly, around how we check into their learning, how do we create assessment opportunities that invite students into learning and highlights their strengths? So that's the summary. Oscar, final word from you about this model, this framework.
Just thank you. We have to make a difference. We have to be intentional. We have to care about every single one of our students, but we need to do everything we can to recognize the strengths of our multilingual learners in our classrooms. Thank you.
Oh, and thanks for all the chat just now. I love how you're focused on strengths. I love that you're focusing on strengths in this room. That makes me super happy.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. I love all the reactions coming up. I super appreciate when you flood that with reactions. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oscar, congratulations. I believe this was your first Corwin webinar.
Yes, the first one, very first one.
Yay.
All right,
Congratulations.
congratulations. Thank you. Enjoy your evening, your afternoon, or wherever the day is going to take you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes, Rebecca, I agree. He did phenomenally well.
Thank you.